From VQR and the Center for Media and Citizenship, this is episode 1 of Circle of Willis, where, to the best of my ability, I respond to the question many of my colleagues have been asking me, which is, why are you doing this?
Hey, son, don't light this cigarette around that gasoline.
This is me and my friend Nick making explosion sounds over and over again by blowing into a microphone. And judging from the intensity of our laughter, this activity was the airy height of humor back then. We were about 15 years old and bored out of our skulls in the Spokane Valley, state of Washington, where there isn't much to occupy a busy adolescent brain. The way the joke went was this: what we do is we'd come up with any scenario that might plausibly involve an explosion, and then we'd blow into the microphone. See, that was the joke. Here at some point in here, we thought it would be fun to rewrite the entire first Star Wars movie this way.
God damn it, Ben, I can't see a thing with the blast shield now.
So I bring this up to introduce my long-standing interest, going back at least to junior high school, in recording time spent with my friends. Something I've always liked to do, and it's a niche interest. I laugh. The word niche makes me laugh. Don't ask me why. Honestly, I've recorded literally hours and hours and hours of this stuff. Conversations with friends where we perform skits, or we just chat about school or unrequited love, or our shitty home lives, sometimes just sitting around making explosion sounds. It was a habit I formed and maintained, sometimes to the point of absurdity. So, for example, in this clip that's going on in the background now, I'm actually on the back of a motorcycle that's speeding through downtown Taipei in Taiwan. Let's see, it's 1989. I think, and I'm one of 3 people on the motorcycle, which is being driven in this case by a Taiwanese buddy of mine that I called Alex, because he didn't much like the way we always bungled his actual Chinese name. Anyway, sort of scrunched between me and Alex on the bike is Alex's girlfriend and my friend Jean, and it's in the middle of the night, but this is Taipei, so the streets are choked with cars and scooters and motorcycles and pedestrians, and I'm not quite sure about this, but I'm pretty sure that all of us are intoxicated. As we're driving along, the weight of our bodies is causing the bike to actually scrape on the road whenever we hit a bump, and we're weaving really very unwisely through traffic and going far, far too fast. And one of the things that I remember about this moment is that all the way through it, this entire period of time, I was literally afraid for my life. And yet, I'm still almost pathologically at this point recording the whole thing, using my little handheld Walkman that I was still carrying with me everywhere. That's what I did. I don't know why exactly. I don't know why, but I sort of have always preferred audio to video. What do you want? I don't know. Maybe I just like the way that audio evokes and augments my memories. I don't know. But anyway, why am I doing this right now? Well, it's a little bit of what I just told you, and the rest is a little bit of a story. So I'm going to tell a story right now. It goes back a few years now. I was at the annual meeting of the Association for Psychological Science, APS, and I got depressed because of an ongoing public conversation I was witnessing among my scientist friends about the state of science in general and psychology in particular. And there was this kind of activist movement that was beginning at the time, and it was really, this movement was really sort of holding the whole field's collective feet to the fire about a bunch of perceived methodological shortcomings, things like failures to replicate studies, insufficient transparency in statistical methods, all those sorts of things. And I was then, and actually I remain, really pretty sympathetic to this movement. I was trained as a methodologist many years ago, and anyway, it's how can you be against better methods? It's just, you can't do that really. So to my mind, it's just never a bad idea to remind ourselves, whatever we're doing, but I think particularly if we're doing science, to try and do better work. So that was good. That was a good part. But I also felt at the time that some folks, often enough, my actual friends, were not really helping matters, in the way they were communicating these concerns. And I started to feel like the conversation was kind of devolving into a cycle of public shaming and defensiveness. A cycle that seemed at the time, to me anyway, to be escalating, and also seemed to be mediated, no surprise, largely through social media, Twitter, Facebook, blogs, that sort of thing. So it's kind of a long story, but I'm not going to go into all of it, but because you can read about it elsewhere. But I wrote a blog post. It's really the only serious blog post I ever wrote. I don't know if I'll ever write another one. I kind of doubt it. And this blog post I wrote mostly the whole first draft of it on the plane home from that conference, and it really basically argued two things. One, I felt it was probably best to strive for and maintain a reasonably high level of professional decorum and civility when coping with scientific disagreements. I didn't think that was particularly controversial. But I also thought that I really wanted to say that whatever else is true, moral outrage is just, it's no substitute for scientific rigor. Moral outrage, I felt, is pretty easy, not a high bar for that. But scientific rigor is not so easy. It's hard. It's tough. Got to work hard at it. Got to earn it. If you'd like to read this blog, and who knows, there is a link to it at CIRCLEOFWILLISPodcast.com. How do you like that? Got a website. Anyway, at the end of my little blog post, I thought maybe I should provide some prescriptive advice for how to move forward with the so-called sort of science debates, and maybe even repair some of the damage that had been done through bad behavior on social media. And as I sat down to write this prescriptive advice, what I found is that I really didn't have any. That wasn't very good. I didn't really have any particular prescriptive advice. I mean, I guess other than, maybe we should actually like literally talk to each other more often, like, face to face. It's the only thing I said at the end of my blog post. And it was a suggestion that seemed to me, anyways, pretty benign, sort of obvious even. But there were some really interesting objections to it. Where else? On Facebook, a Facebook research methodology group. Somewhere along the way in Facebook land there, I got to reminiscing about great conversations I'd had during conferences, usually at the bar somewhere, sometime after the day's events, with fellow scientists. These were conversations where we discussed everything from methodological issues with this or that study to failures to replicate a given finding, whatever. And I said, that these face-to-face meetings essentially never, ever included that rancor that you see in online discussions now all the time. So I suggested that, people just behave better when they're face-to-face. I mean, right? This is not controversial, right? We all know that now. We've all had more than 10 years of Facebook, and we all sort of know that we're better at disagreeing in person. But in addition to that, I suggested that there really was no downside to having face-to-face conversations. It was the big plus side was that we were able to actually talk things through in a reasonably civil manner, and the downside was, well, there just wasn't any. I mean, it wasn't like we avoided talking about problems with each other's work. It's quite the contrary. I talked about problems with my work with people at the bar all the time. But there was a problem. A wise Facebook friend of mine objected to this point on the grounds that those conversations that I was having face-to-face at the bar were private, and that was the rub here. For all the bad behavior that I think we were starting to see on social media, those discussions came with at least one undeniable benefit, major benefit, and that was that pretty much everyone has access to them. By contrast, those conversations that I love so much at the bar remained sort of bottled up, shared, only among what might be a pretty elite club of folks with the resources and time to be there. So, my friend said something like, great, but what about the grad student out there? Maybe in a less resourced program or country who never gets to hear your civil barroom tale of multiple failures to replicate some effect, and who then goes on to make that same effect the centerpiece of an almost certainly doomed dissertation. And, I was like, well, because I didn't really know what to say other than, that's a pretty good point right there. That's something. So that kind of depressed me. Well, the path from that point to this one has been pretty long and circuitous. Just by the way, I love that word, circuitous. Great word. Anyway, what happened was I started out interviewing some psychologists for a book project that my wife, who, by the way, is named Kat Thrasher, real name, that's her name, Kat Thrasher. We started working on a book project that we were thinking of doing. At the time, Kat was a professional photographer, and we had sort of hatched this idea to interview psychologists while taking their portraits. So in this clip that's playing in the background now, you can hear her camera clicking away while I interview social psychologist Harry Reese.
And 1, 2, 3. Great.
The sound of her camera, by the way, is so deeply satisfying because she's using one of those old manual Hasselblad cameras with the medium format film. She's just taking these amazing, amazing portraits. And the idea of portraits and interviews was, I guess, really about sort of humanizing these folks as much as anything else. You know, we were, of course, we were into their work, but you know, with the interviews, what we were planning to do, and with the obviously with the portraits, was to really sort of delve more into their careers, you know, their personal lives, you know, to understand their personalities, and even show you what they sort of look like, not sort of, but actually. It seemed like the best way. It seemed to us at the time like perhaps the best way to push back against what we perceive to be this sort of dehumanizing effect of social media, you know? But it didn't take us long to realize that failing some very generous subvention from somebody, our book idea was not affordable. We actually stopped after only 5 interviews because we just couldn't pay for the film development costs, and it's a shame, really. The recordings I made at that time, they aren't great because I was originally thinking of just sort of summarizing them for the book, you know, sort of quoting from them while I wrote something in a narrative format, but. I wish I could play them for you right now because they're hilarious and moving and really deeply informative.
If I'd gone to Columbia, I actually would have worked with Stanley Schachter.
I keep thinking maybe one day I'll find a way to release them, but they're just not great recordings. So the interview/portrait project was scrapped, but the project did something to me. It sort of reawakened that kid in me who used to just record almost everything, and who has still this vault of old recorded conversations with a bunch of old friends, all made many years ago.
He ended up in Connecticut.
I kind of felt that old addiction flare back to life, and I was itching to do more, but I didn't really have a plan. So I didn't really know how to proceed.
On a cold, wet Monday morning, my friend Cherie Harder and I arrive at the University of Virginia's Neuroscience Laboratory in Charlottesville, Virginia.
At some point, Barbara Bradley Haggerty of NPR News had visited my lab to record a story about some of the work we'd been doing. And obviously, it's NPR. She recorded the whole thing. She was really interesting. And the whole experience was super positive. And then a while later, I met up with her again in Washington, D.C. for a follow-up interview, which we actually recorded in her car using one of her assorted high-end mics. And that was such a cool, in her car, that was such a cool experience that it got me thinking, hey, this looks fun. I want to do this. It wasn't a particularly profound epiphany, but I did feel like it looked like fun, so I wanted to do it. And a little while after that, I actually wrote to Barb, and I told her that I wanted to do that, and she was super encouraging and actually gave me some coaching even. And what she did was she really turned me on to the idea of a podcast. That she said that podcasts were becoming a pretty big deal even at NPR, where people really enjoyed the freedom that podcasts offered to really sink their teeth into an interview or a story. And after that conversation, I was sort of dazzled, to be honest. I went out and bought some equipment. I started requesting interviews with folks and just got busy making some recordings. And what has happened since that time has sort of blown me away. These have been great conversations, at least for me. Obviously I hope that you enjoy them too, but whatever. I'm having the time of my life here. And I'm not even sure what this podcast project is even about anymore. Do I still find value in humanizing scientists? Absolutely. Do I still think this might be a way to sort of push back against the worst elements of social media? Yes, I do. but I'm mostly just scratching an itch here right now. I love to talk with people about their lives and their work, and now I want to record them. I want to record those conversations, just like I used to as a kid. I want to talk with my colleagues about their work, sure, but also their lives, their careers, their families, really, whatever comes up. I want to contribute to a collective understanding that scientists are sort of ever and always people first, deserving of all the interest and sympathy and respect that implies. But what I don't want, and I realize this goes against pretty much all of the advice for podcasters that exists anywhere, is for this podcast to be about a particular thing, even scientists. Yeah, I'll mostly be talking with scientists here, but I might chat with some science writers too. Might do that. Maybe some journalists. Hell with it. Maybe I'll talk with some poets and novelists. I don't know. If I want to, that's what I'll do. But science will probably come up. So maybe that's the rock bottom thing that this podcast is really about. It's about science, sort of one way or another. But if that's true, then I'd have to add that it's also about people, one way or another. And I feel strongly about that. I don't want to be pigeonholed. But so you might be thinking, well, okay, that's all fine, Jim. You're a little excitable, aren't you? Yes, I am. Can't help it. That's what you get. But you might be wondering, so why is this even called? Why do you call your podcast Circle of Willis? And the answer to that question is I don't really know. I mean, to be honest, if I'm being completely honest, I just like it. Just like it. I think it's kind of funny. I mean, I guess. Okay, so back in 1989 or so, when I first learned about the Circle of Willis, sort of what it is, I was knocked out by its redundant sort of design, by the way it had been sort of shaped by natural selection to ensure that the brain always had access to a robust supply of blood. Okay, and I'll say more about that in a second. But really, the other thing I loved about the Circle of Willis was that it kind of looked like a little, I don't know, like a little man, like a little blood man, I guess. Really, it does. Google it, or just go to circleofwillispodcast.com, and you'll see what I mean. But so the little blood man inspired a persistent interest in the vasculature of the brain that really continues to this day. I'm not kidding. I was really impressed by that little guy. And by the way, I also thought, hey, Circle of Willis would be a cool band name. And I tried to make that happen for a little bit. That didn't work. Didn't work out for me. And then, I guess more recently I thought, hey, Circle of Willis would be a cool name for a podcast, for my podcast. So, but, yep. Anyway, in addition to being a sort of cryptic and loosely metaphorical podcast name, the Circle of Willis is, as I was saying a few moments ago, the key mediator of blood to and throughout your brain. So there's a cool answer about that. And as cool as that is, I think it gets even cooler because you see the Circle of Willis is also, it's arranged as a redundant blood supply to the brain, meaning that if any one part of the flow of blood to the circle gets blocked, other sources are able to compensate. And that's why it looks like a circle. And, to me, it's sort of like a little blood man. Look, I wasn't intending for this introductory episode to be quite so rambling, but that's how it happened, isn't it? And I'm just gonna go with that because my day job is still, I'm a full-time professor I'm running a neuroscience laboratory at the University of Virginia with, graduate students and staff and things. And we're writing grants and papers and collecting data, all that stuff. The real thing. That's what I'm doing. And but all that's for another time. Right now, I just want to say thanks for, I don't know exactly, tuning in, downloading. How do you refer to podcast listening exactly? Should I know that? I feel like I should know that. Listen, the main point is there are a bunch of really great conversations coming up in the next several weeks. These are folks like Eli Finkel, Lisa Diamond, John Cassiopo, Judy Deloach, David Sloan Wilson, Nilanjana Dasgupta, Marco Iacoboni, Brian Nosek, Lisa Feldman Barrett, Tanya Singer. It goes on and on. There's just a bunch more. I'm just naming names right now, and I don't want it to get too tedious. But trust me, there's a lot more coming. A lot of people that I've talked to, I'm talking to more all the time, and they're interesting. They're really interesting, and I hope you like them. I think you will. All right, I want to thank a few people for Circle of Willis. Circle of Willis is a group project in many ways. First of all, I want to thank Tom Stouffer and Gene Ruley for creating some really amazing music that we use here on Circle of Willis. And by the way, for more information about their music, check out the About page at circleofwillispodcast.com, where you'll find a link to their Amazon page where you can actually purchase some of the music that you hear at this place, that is to say. Now, I also want to send out some special thanks. Some special thanks really for their general support and some real rock-solid resources go to Siva Vaidyanathan at the Center for Media and Citizenship, and Paul Reyes of VQR, Nathan Moore at WTJU here in Charlottesville, Virginia, and also for their invaluable advice and encouragement on this project. I'd really like to thank Lulu Miller and Barbara Bradley Haggerty, both of NPR News and of the world, where they continue to pursue a bunch of interesting independent projects. Thanks, you guys. And that's all I got. Don't forget that Circle of Willis is brought to you by VQR and the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia. Plus, Circle of Willis is a member of the TEEJ FM network. You can find more about that at teej.fm. Okay, I'll see you at episode 2, where I'll talk with Eli Finkel of Northwestern University about the history and science of marriage. Until then, see you next time. Bye-bye.